Hello everybody, welcome back. We're going to be starting our next section today, which is looking at a whole new method referred to as completing the square. Previously, we've looked at factoring, so it's tying in back with that previous chapter. Last section, we looked at the square root property, and today our method is going to be called completing the square, which completing the square ties in a little bit of the square root property. And basically, when you complete the square, you do a couple calculations to create a perfect square binomial to use the square root property. And we're going to examine how that works. But before we go through and examine and tie that back in, let's do a little bit of practice with factoring. All right, factor the trinomials at the top. My first example is x squared plus ax plus 16. Remember, when I factor, I want to figure out what adds to equal my stuff in the middle, but also multiplies to equal my c. All right, so I'm going to have x here and x here. I got to figure out what adds together to equal 8, but multiplies together to equal 16. Well, that's going to be 4. So plus 4 plus 4. Simplify that down, I get x plus 4 squared. Let's do another one. I have x squared minus 10x plus 25. I have to factor to figure out what adds to equal negative 10, but multiplies together to equal 25. Well, that is going to be x minus 5 and x minus 5, which simples down to x minus 5 squared. Those trinomials are unique because they're referred to as perfect square trinomials. Why is that? Well, they have the same junk within their trunks. Within the parentheses, they're both identical. So we can simplify it down to this format of x plus 4 squared. And that is important because we use it within quadratic equations. So let's do a couple more examples as far as factoring perfect square trinomials before we tie it into quadratic equations. And here in example 1 and 2, my goal is going to be to factor the perfect square trinomial and then solve the equation by the square roots. All right, so here my example 1, I have x squared plus 4x plus 4 equal to 25. Well, is x squared plus 4x plus 4, is that a perfect square trinomial? It is, because that can factor to x plus 2 times x plus 2, because 2 and 2 add together to equal 4, but are multiplied together to equal 4. So I simplify that down to x plus 2 squared equal to 25. Now, referring back to my square root properties, I can take the square root of both of those sides and get rid of that exponent. So when I take the square root of that, that leaves me with x plus 2 because my square root and exponent cancel out. And then I have the square root of 25, which equals plus or minus 5. So to solve, I'm going to split that up. So I'm going to say minus 2 minus 2. So I will have either x is equal to positive 5 minus 2 or x is equal to negative 5 minus 2, which I solve and get 3, or I solve and get negative 7. So my final answer for this one is 3, negative 7. Okay? So really, in this method, you know, one of your first instincts is, okay, I gotta move that 25 over to set it all equal to 0 within your original equation. That was my first instinct as well. However, things to note here is when you look at your equations, your first thing to check out is, okay, do I have a perfect square trinomial? And if I do, looking at what's left over on the right-hand side of my equation, is that a perfect square? If it is, you'll most likely use this method, kind of looking at perfect square trinomials. All right, so let's do another example. I have x squared plus 6x plus 9. Is that a perfect square trinomial? It is, because 3 times 3 adds together, or I'm sorry, 3 times 3 multiplies together to equal 9, but adds together to equal 6. So that simplifies down to x plus 3 squared is equal to 1. All right, to get rid of that exponent, I'm going to take the square root, which gives me x plus 3 is equal to plus or minus 1. So x is equal to, if I subtract my 3 over, 1 minus 3, or x is equal to negative 1 minus 3. So x is equal to negative 2 or negative 4. All right, so that's a little bit of pulling your skills from previous chapters and combining them together, but we're going to take it a step further. This has been known as the perfect square trinomial method. And we usually don't call it that method because it's simply combining your square root property and your factoring properties. So typically we don't tie it with a name, but this is kind of like the stepping stone to your completing the square. What happens if I don't have a perfect square on my left-hand side? What do I do? Well, then you use the completing the square method, which involves creating a perfect square trinomial. So when you don't have a perfect square trinomial, you use complete the square. All right. And through this method, we look at it in two factors. One is if we don't have an exponent in front over here, or that exponent's an understood 1, and then we'll look at it if there is a coefficient in front of that x squared. All right, so let's look at this first half. What happens if I don't have a perfect square trinomial? I have x squared plus 8x plus 7. That's not a perfect square trinomial. But we are going to create one. How do you create one? Well, I'm going to take my b, which is 8, and I'm going to take 8 divided by 2. Or actually, hold on, backtrack a little bit. Beep, 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 beep. First step, I need to rewrite it as x squared plus bx equals c. So I need to move my 7 over. So I'll have x squared plus 8x is equal to negative 7. Now I'm going to look at that b value, and I'm going to take half of b. All right, I'm not messing with my equations yet. I'm just thinking ahead. Okay, what's 8 divided by 2? Well, 8 divided by 2 is 4. All right, what happens if I take the if I square 4? So 4 squared. Well, that equals 16. All right. Now stay with me for a second. Okay. If I had x squared plus 8x plus 16, is that a perfect square trinomial? It is, because I would have x plus 4, because x plus 4, or 4 plus 4 equals 8, and 4 times 4 equals 16. So this method right here helps us create a perfect square trinomial. However, I don't have a 16 in this equation up here, but I can add it. If I had, stick with me for a second, okay? If I had x plus 3 is equal to 5 plus 3, what would x be? Well, x would be 5 because those 3's cancel out. We can add whatever number we want right here. Okay? I could say x plus 10, x plus 10, x plus 20, x plus 20. And my x value would still be 5 because whatever I add to the left side, I also add it to the right side and it cancels out. So that's how we get that perfect square trinomial. We take our b value, we divide it by 2, and then square that value to figure out, okay, what number would create my perfect square trinomial? And in this case, it would be 16. Then I add that same number to the opposite side. So here I would have x squared plus 8x plus 16. is equal to negative 7 plus 16. I have the same equation as I did up here. I just added 16 and 16 on the same side. Why do we do this? Well, having the perfect square trinomial helps us solve for x. Okay, now that I have that 16 on each side, I'm going to go to step 3 and take the square root of both sides. Or not take the square root of both sides. I need to condense that factor first. So what's x squared plus 8x plus 4? Well, we said that condenses down to x plus 4 squared. Okay, and I got to simplify negative 7 plus 16, which gives me 9. Now I'm going to institute step 3 and take the square root of both sides to get rid of that exponent. So I have x plus 4 is equal to positive or plus or minus whatever the square root of 9 is, which is 3. Now I simplify. So I'm going to have x, let's see, I'm going to minus 4 over. X is equal to 3 minus 4, and x is equal to negative 3 minus 4. So x is equal to negative 1, and x is equal to negative 7. All right, I know that method took a little bit of a while to explain because I wanted you to understand why we're doing each step, and it may be very confusing, okay? But we're going to do more and more problems to help understand this method. So let's look at another one. I want to change it up. I want to do a different color. Let's do peach. All right, solve the following quadratic equation by completing the square. I have x squared plus 4x minus 5. All right, my first job is going to be to rewrite my equation, move that 5 over. So I'll have x squared plus 4x is equal to 5. My first goal is going to be able to create that perfect square trinomial. So what's my b value? Well, that'll be 4. So I'm going to take 4 divided by 2, which is 2. 2 squared, which is 4. So I'm going to add 4 to both sides of my equation. Now I'm going to take the perfect square root, or not perfect square root, I'm going to simplify that perfect square trinomial. So x squared plus 4x plus 4, if I'm going to factor that, that equals x plus 2 squared, because 2 plus 2 equals 4, and 2 times 2 equals 4. I'm going to simplify my right-hand side, so 5 plus 4 is 9. Now I'm going to use the square root property, take the square root of both of those values. The square root of this exponent crosses it out, leaving me with x plus 2. And the square root of 9 is plus or minus 3. All right. I'm going to subtract this 2 over, solve for x. So x is equal to positive 3 minus 2, and x is equal to negative 3 minus 2. So x is equal to 1, or x is equal to negative 5. See, not too crazy. All right, let's look at another one. I have x squared plus 7 is equal to 18x plus 9. This problem looks like it's going to be more complicated, but it just didn't give the equation to you in standard form. Move things around, put it in standard form. So my standard form is x squared plus bx is equal to c. So I'm going to subtract my 71 over. Subtract my 71. So I'll have x squared is equal to 18x minus 80. I'm going to subtract my 18x over, to give me x squared minus 18x equals minus 80. I got to figure out what my perfect square trinomial is going to be. So I'm going to look at my b value, which is 18. So negative 18 divided by 2 gives me negative 9. Negative 9 squared gives me 81. So I'm going to add 81 to both sides. So I'll have x squared minus 18x, and I will have negative 80 plus 81. All right, time to factor and simplify. So x squared minus 18x plus 81 simplifies down to x minus 9 squared is equal to 81 minus 80 gives me 1. I'm going to take the square root of both to get rid of that squared value. I'm going to move this up here. So I'll have x minus 9 is equal to plus or minus 1. I'm going to break her up and solve for x. So plus 9 plus 9. I'll have positive 1 plus 9, and x is equal to negative 1 plus 9. So x is equal to 10 and 8. All right. Okay, stick with me. A couple more problems. What happens if I have an a value or I have that coefficient? All right. We're going to rewrite our equation into the same format. I'm going to go blue now. I'm going to mix her up. All right, so I'm going to subtract or add my 5 over. So I'll have 4x squared plus 8x equals 5. And I'm going to divide my whole equation by that coefficient. So divide by 4, divide by 4. Now I now have x squared plus 2x is equal to 5/4. Oh, I got an email. Now I'm going to complete my method to complete the square. So looking at my v value, I take 2 divided by 2, which gives me 1. 1 squared is 1. So to factor it, I'm going to add 1 to each side. So I'll have x squared plus 2x plus 1 is equal to 5/4 plus 1. Now it's time to factor and take the square root. So to factor that, I'll have x plus 1 squared is equal to, let's see, 5/4 plus 1. Well, 1 is the same as 4/4. So I'll have 9/4. Now it's time to take the square root. Square root. That square root cancels out my exponent to leave me with x plus 1 is equal to the square root of 9/4. Well, if I were to break that up, I would have square root of 9 over square root of 4, which would be equal to, plus or minus, oh goodness, plus or minus 3/2. Okay. So 3/2. Oh, plus or minus 3/2. My last step is to solve for x. So I have x equals 3/2 minus 1, or x is equal to negative 3/2 minus 1. 1 is the same as 2/2. 2/2. So negative 3/2 minus 2/2, which gives me negative 5/2. 3 minus 2 all over 2 is equal to 1/2. So my final answer for x is negative 5/2, comma 1/2. All right. When you have an equation that has that coefficient in front of it, all you simply do, you rewrite the equation as you would previously and complete the square, and divide by that coefficient. That helps you set you up for success. Okay. Let's see. How many more examples do we want to do? Let's do one more. Okay. I know I put extra in here, but this is the same method that you've completed previously. Okay. Except the only difference is you're adding in that extra exponent. Do we want to do a challenging one? Let's do a challenging one. All right. Let's do example 9, my last example. I have 8x squared plus 16x. Am I in my correct format? Yes, I am. So what's my first step? It's going to be to divide by that coefficient. So divide by 8. That leaves me, I'm looking at my equation right now. That's supposed to be 90. What am I doing? 90. Okay. That would have messed up the whole problem. Ay, 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 ay. So I'm going to divide that whole equation by 8, which gives me x squared plus 2x is equal to 90 over 8, which 90 over 8 simplifies down to 45 over 4 by dividing those both by 2. All right, time to make my perfect square trinomial. So I'm going to take my b value, divide by 2, which gives me 1. 1 squared gives me 1. So to rewrite that equation, I'll have x squared plus 2x plus 1 equal to 45 over 4 plus 1, which 1 rewritten as a fraction could be 4 over 4. My next step is to factor, which x squared plus 2x plus 1 factors down to x plus 1 squared. 45 plus 4 is 49 over 4. I'm going to take the square root of both of those sides, leaving me with x plus 1 is equal to the square root of 49 over 4, which is plus or minus 7 over 2. So my last step is to solve for x. So x is equal to positive 7 over 2 minus 1, or 7 over 2, negative 7 over 2 minus 1. 1 could be rewritten as 2 over 2. So x is equal to 5/2, or x is equal to negative 9 over 2. So 5 over 2, comma, negative 9 over 2. All right, that's all I have for you today. I know this section was a little bit long, but I just have to get all this content to you. We're going to have 2 days going over completing the square. And if you guys have any questions, please